Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, September 8th, 2022. Time for another show. And let's see. I mean, a weird roundup of news. There's lots of hair on fire news right here at home. But I guess if you're the type to let your hair on fire over what happens in the UK, either because you're in the UK and are a monarchist, because, I mean, some of you in the UK might not care very much, and or are just, I don't know, an overseas admirer. It sounds like Queen Elizabeth may be at the end of her rope, as it were, and on her way out, which, as monarchs go, means death, so that's not so great for them. We're not supposed to care about that stuff, but I don't know. We have an abnormal attachment to this particular monarch, I guess, a lot of times, because she's more of a pop culture figure here in the United States than anything else. And she's been around a long time, and it makes people sad to think about her departure, I suppose. It can only be worse, I'm sure, in the UK, where they actually have reason to be attached to the monarch. And so, condolences there, if that's the case. She's been, in a rough patches before, but I mean, how many times can you keep going with this? One day, we'll all be waiting for Donald Trump to reach his deathbed and leave us all alone, except we'll probably react differently to that one. And there's so much reason to do so, because, I don't know, it's horrible that all the things that are going on here. Legal wrangling everywhere, not only for Trump, but for Trump minions. We could probably do the whole show just about that, and the Queen, I guess, because we already spent time on that. All right. I know Greg has already been rounding up stories as well. I just did see mention from Justice that Skype is running slow. Is that the case? Is that the case for everybody? I don't know. We'll find out when Greg calls in, and I guess if the call comes in slow motion, we'll have some idea of what's going on. I think it would just not work if it was running too slow. Good news from my phone. The bus has arrived. That's good news. And now we'll just keep one eye on the texts to see whether there's one that says, I'm not on it. But I think all is going well in that respect. All right, let's see. Where shall we start? There's really nothing you can do. You should just stick a pin in a map and just start here. How about we stick a pin in Twitter just for the morning? Happened to see Matthew Gertz flying by, giving his Media Matters type update for the day. Today's a lot of, it would be a good day to just roam the headlines and then talk about what they mean just in general and what the story behind those stories is. Matt Gertz tweeting some news items since President Biden sent Republicans and right-wing media to their fainting couches by describing Trump's philosophy as semi-fascism. What's in the headlines that he's grabbed today? Here's Trump demands either new election immediately or make him rightful, quote unquote, rightful president now. Sure, that probably didn't disturb anybody, right? I mean, this is the general problem over and over with the press is you can run headlines like that and everybody's like, that's just Trump being Trump. And Biden gives a speech. Oh my God, the Marines! He said and they're in apoplexy for weeks because they just don't, expect or tolerate that sort of stuff from Democrats. But Republicans, especially Trump, well, they're just wing nuts. What can you do? Let's see. Here's another item. Trump vows pardons, government apology to Capitol rioters if elected. There was, of course, that. And it made the news. It's not like they didn't cover it. It's just, this is like 6 days on that red background and he had Marines. Here's the CNN tweet, or a CNN exclusive contained in, I guess, one of their own reporters' tweets. Shocking new video obtained by Drew Griffin at CNN shows Republican leaders in Michigan training poll workers to break the rules so that they can act as undercover agents during midterm elections in November. I have that full story for you as well. And finally, another story I also tucked away. Doubtless Greg has all of these tucked away as well. Trump pushed officials to prosecute his critics, ex-U.S. attorney says. Jeffrey Berman, who you all may remember from the Southern District of Manhattan, and forced out under the Trump administration, finally has his book ready, so now we can figure out at last all of the horrible things that they were doing. Jeff Berman says in his book that the Justice Department pushed certain cases against John Kerry and others in order to help Mr. Trump. And gosh, I think we all knew that was going on, but there it is. And none of the apoplexy that I am used to seeing from our friends in the press. Let's see. There's other stuff that I was reminded of last night, and I kind of retweeted it this morning because it's kind of important. I was just wondering about why we don't see a similar reaction here. But I saw also from who's tweeting this? Kadia Goba, who I don't know who that is. Okay, covering politics. No wonder I don't know where I don't know where she's coming from, but she's probably well accomplished. She is blue check marked and has a nice illustration of herself and everything. Covering politics now for Semaphore, which I guess is actually a new product that's not, she says it's not actually out yet. They're not yet launched, but she couldn't wait with this story. But here's her new story here. House Republicans, of course, we have heard this, are laying plans for 2 years of investigations, impeachments, and retribution, key word there, against Joe Biden and the Democrats. Targets include, of course, Merrick Garland and Alejandro Mayorkas and everything from the border to inflation. Okay, well known, expected, etc. But I was just sort of thinking about it last night and saying it to myself and to all of you on Twitter. So who remembers, who's old enough here to remember this stuff? Are you old enough to remember when the political press was actually aghast at the time that Democrats might investigate the George W. Bush administration, or even possibly subject him or Dick Cheney to impeachment proceedings for any number of things, including, of course, warrantless surveillance of American citizens, which the New York Times saw fit to bury for a couple of months so as not to affect the elections, even though I thought that's why I read newspapers, so that I could figure out who I did and didn't want to vote for and who was and wasn't responsibly using the power of government. It's just silly. It's really about crossword puzzles. And now Wordle, I guess. And at any rate, they were getting set to investigate. People thought, maybe we'll have some investigations of the George W. Bush administration and how he's running things. And my recollection was that the press immediately went to, this is just tit for tat for the Clinton impeachment. They identified it as such, which I thought was kind of a stretch to begin with, but they were sold on that comparison. And this is really just tit for tat for the Clinton impeachment, which was a couple years gone by the point that they were talking about, investigating the George W. Bush administration. At any rate, they were positive that was the case. Meanwhile, of course, they wanted to investigate the administration because in addition to warrantlessly wiretapping American citizens, they were torturing people overseas to try to create a narrative that would support their gigantic mistake of a war. But the idea that could be investigated or people could be held accountable for that, I practically had the press corps throwing up in paper bags at, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's outrageous. Republicans now openly can't give enough interviews. Yes, absolutely. We're going to have impeachment hearings for Biden. He's a traitor because he had a red background and there were some Marines there and any number of other things and PS, blah, blah, blah. And maybe Second Amendment solutions and and we're going to prosecute Merrick Garland because only 1 million people were killed because we refused to take this thing seriously. I don't know what it's going to take to change that. Oh, I don't know. Probably there's just nothing to be done about it. There's just no, I don't know. I read that story about the Republicans instructing their people to break the rules during the midterm elections as elections observers out in Michigan. And, I guess why not, right? It's all upside for these guys. I don't know what the punishment is going to be for finding out that they said, yeah, break the rules. Because they'll just say, they're minor rules. It's not like it's the nuclear secrets or anything. Not that would matter if it was, of course. And that's the balance of the show. I think probably we'll be talking about that and other things, and probably polling about how they're really, really nasty people. Greg Dworkin is here to take over the direction of the show. I will wrest it back from him in the second hour, but time for me to rest from resting it now and let him get a word in. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So you're resting your court case, are you?
No, I reserve the right. I reserve the balance of my time. There you go.
I'm reclaiming mine.
Yes. Okay.
So let's start where I think we should start.
All right.
And that is today's Reuters poll just released this morning.
Okay. And it's Star Trek Day.
Most Americans
I don't know what that is.
see
Yes.
Trump's MAGA as threat to democracy.
All right.
So however you slice it, Biden's September 1st speech marked a sharp turn for his efforts to boost Democrats in the November 8th midterms, when Republicans aim to win control of the U.S. Congress for reasons that you just articulated.
Yeah.
But 58% of respondents in the two-day poll, including 1 in 4 Republicans, said Trump's Make America Great Again movement is threatening Americans' democratic foundations.
Oh.
So the message is, in
All
fact, getting through. Yes, in the poll, it also says, and unfortunately they had the poll results, but not the link to the poll itself, so we can't look at the crosstabs and see who's voting what. But they do point out that while Trump remains popular among Republicans, his standing within the party has suffered since a mob of his supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol. 60% of Republicans don't think Trump's MAGA movement represents the majority of the party. 60% of Republicans are wrong because they keep electing them.
Yeah.
Right. We can see that in the primaries. So, I think if you're a media figure whose coverage of Biden's speech got it all wrong because you were concentrated on what colors were in the background or whether there were 2 Marines standing there defending democracy,
you can't use red.
Here's your chance to redo. Like, you can look at the poll and say, okay, and you can say, look, I realize I spent too much time on the background color scheme, but Americans got the big picture. Maybe I should too.
Yeah.
Or you could say, I'm sorry, we don't always get everything right in the moment. I'll do better next time.
Acceptable.
You could do that. And by the way, not really, because as somebody pointed out, Emily Gooden, who does U.S. political stuff for Daily Mail, said Michelle Obama sounds political in her remarks about the unveiling of the portraits, the gorgeous portraits. You see the people that make their voices heard with their vote. We hold an inauguration to ensure a peaceful transition of power. Once our time is up, we move on, said Michelle Obama. And she said, Michelle Obama sounds political in her remarks.
You mean right in her remarks, correct?
So George Conway said, oh my gosh, I can't believe Mrs. Obama's outrageous partisan attack on coup d'etats.
Yeah.
And John Cleese noted, this kind of partisan attack, deliberately excluding traitors and making them feel unwelcome, reminds me of the appalling partisanship Winston Churchill displayed in his wartime speeches. How horrible he was, calling his enemies Nazis.
Yeah, and by the way, really, wasn't it kind of rude to the Japanese to say that December 7th would live in infamy? I mean, we were down, but not out, and really, shouldn't American
just to put all of that in perspective.
Yeah.
So, they say it about Michelle Obama. They can't get over themselves.
Yeah.
But the American people aren't having it, is my point.
Good.
Now, this is Tom Nichols writing in The Atlantic, The Nihilism of MAGA World. The president said something frightening and true.
Current president.
Joe Biden's Soul of the Nation address got at a cold and disquieting truth. The MAGA movement cannot be placated, reasoned with, or politically accommodated in any way. There's nothing its adherents want and nothing anyone can give them beyond chaos and political destruction. So once you recognize that, then you can move on.
All right.
So, Tom Nichols is a military guy, at least a civilian military guy.
Oh.
War college professor, now retired. And he didn't care for the Marines in the background. But he wrote at the time, Joe Biden's address to the American people last week was necessary and right. bizarre staging. Speech had the hallmarks of group product that hadn't been subjected to a final spackle and smooth. But Biden got the big thing right. And that one thing explains why Donald Trump and the MAGA world apologists are reacting with such fury. The president outed them as anti-American nihilists.
Yeah.
They promote authoritarian leaders, the president said, and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice. MAGA Republicans have made their choice. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. They live not in the light of truth, but in the shadow of lies. And in fact, the American people get it. Here's another thing the American people get. This is by Aaron Blake, and it's illustrative, I think, of something that's important, and that is timeframes. His story is, on judging Trump, Americans are moving from unethical to illegal.
Oh, yes.
And there's a nice little chart that goes with that. Americans appear to be warming to the idea that former President Donald Trump's broken the law and are less willing to dismiss his actions as merely being unethical. Merely. He's merely unethical and a slob and a horrible person and a terrible human being. No, more than that. He actually broke the law.
Well, they're right.
That's what happens when you find nuclear stuff there. Then you get the Bush people.
I guess so, right? Yeah. And
in new polling, Trump's effort to overturn the 2020 election and his storage of sensitive documents have reached new highs in the percentages of Americans who say Trump broke the law, rather than saying his actions were unethical but not illegal. On both issues, more Americans say Trump broke the law, 45 and 44% respectively, than ever said so during the investigation into Russia's interference.
Okay.
Political middle remains somewhat mixed in its views, and the poll suggests Trump's devoted base, which regards him as blameless, continues to constitute 3 in 10 Americans. So again, 30% of the public you can write off. That's always been true. Same percentage who didn't think Nixon should step down. Then they list all of the different polls, including 45% thinking the 2020 election efforts were illegal, 45% in a CNN poll, 44% in a Marist poll, say Mar-a-Lago documents. The Mar-a-Lago documents were illegal.
I'm told you can say it either way.
You could say it either way. But the thing is, the investigation of the January 6, 2021 insurrection has been building for some time. And we'll talk about building waves when we get to some recent polling from Michigan. But the reaction to the attack on the Capitol also appears to be instantaneous. We don't have multiple polls, but when you looked at posing a binary question, did Trump break the law or didn't he? For the first time in his political career, majority said he had. That's faded a bit. But what's evident, though, Aaron Blake writes, is that compared to almost his entire tenure in office, it's now becoming less of a leap for people to believe Trump broke the law. And while most Americans still aren't convinced he did, and Trump retains the loyalty of much of the GOP, these numbers are not exactly conducive to regaining the presidency in 2024. Point being, these things take time. They take time to develop because a lot of the facts need to come out. For example, David Rothkopf writing in the Daily Beast yesterday, we need to know Trump's motive for taking classified documents. Or David Frum writing in The Atlantic, Biden laid the trap, Trump walked into it. At his Pennsylvania rally, the former president gave exactly the narcissistic display his Democratic nemesis tried to provoke.
Oh, well, all right then.
So, these things do in fact take time. Here's one from the LA Times today. Something horribly failed. How did so many of America's secrets end up at Mar-a-Lago? And they talk about the horror in the intelligence community, and that's going to take a little while to come out as well. So, as you pointed out, for example, with the prosecutor pointing out Berman that he was threatened had pressure put on him, I should say, to prosecute John Kerry. That all came out in a book that he's writing because you don't get any bucks for saying it at a press conference.
Right.
So,
what's the matter with
there's various and sundry reasons why this takes time to come out.
Yeah, I thought it was the wheels of
But
justice.
it comes out little by little by little, and Americans learn by repetition. And so if you keep saying it, as Fox does, you wind up, convincing people over time.
All right. Well, yeah, and you have to convince them over time because that's how long it takes to publish a book.
Yeah,
I thought it was the wheels of justice. It turns out it was the wheels of the printing press that turn slowly.
So a lot of news to get to, but I just wanted to paint the picture here of people actually understanding what Biden was saying. And individual CNN correspondents in the morning can say, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that with Marines. You know, maybe there are some people that agree with that. It doesn't matter. It's not the essence of what was going on there. And, you could point out that Lou Gehrig hit 4 home runs in a game if you're calling the game. And you could also point out, he swung and missed a bunch of times.
Yeah.
That's not the point.
That one
The point is he hit 4 home runs. And
yes.
Sure, he had to bend down and
hair,
tie a shoe once.
Right. That would be accurate reporting.
4 home runs. If you're missing that essential point, you're missing what really happened.
Right.
And that's true with his speech.
That is true. Okay. Well, I don't think they're getting the message on the speech. A lot of them are dug in on that.
Well, that's okay. They can dig in on that one point. The point is America is moving on. They'll have to follow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if they
want
our money,
they're not paid to be stupid. So this is Detroit, and as Michigan goes, so goes the nation. Detroit News, I should say. And these are behind a paywall, unfortunately. But let me give you the essence. We talked about the Attorney General and the Secretary of State races the other day. Same pollster. Governor Gretchen Whitmer's lead grows as fall campaign begins, new poll finds.
All right. This is in the state where they were telling people to cheat.
Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer's lead over Republican Tudor Dixon has expanded to 13 percentage points with 2 months remaining.
Too bad, Tudor.
The statewide survey of 600 likely voters in the battleground state found 48% supported Whitmer, while 35% backed Dixon. About 4% of likely voters said they would vote for a third party. 13% say they were undecided. It's the governor's race. People are more inclined to be decided. 13% still a relatively large number, but it's Labor Day. And at the same time, it's less than the 20% for the Secretary of State and Attorney General races. The Lansing-based Glenn Gariff Group conducted the poll. And the important part about this, I think, is a companion story going into it in a little bit more depth with the headline that says, abortion drives Michigan governor's race as women turn against the GOP.
Okay, yes.
Right? And that's really the important part. While it came to which issue would motivate Michiganians to vote in November, 34% said abortion and women's right, ranking above inflation and the cost of living at 26, education 10, the economy and jobs 8. This should be about Democratic President Joe Biden, said the pollster Richard Zuba, C-Z-U-B-A, C is silent, Richard Zuba, said of the governor's race. And it's not, it's about abortion. Among female voters in the poll, to drive home this point, Whitmer had a 27-point lead over Dixon, 54-27. Among male voters, Dixon had a narrow lead, 43-42.
That's Tudor.
Okay. In the latest poll, 80% of Michigan voters said they believed abortion should be legal in situations involving rape or incest, and among self-identifying strong Republicans, 63% said they supported allowing abortion in case of rape or incest. Kansas.
Yeah. Right? Come on,
and here's the observation. Again, pollsters don't just add up the numbers. They sort of look at trends as well. That's their job, kind of analyze the situation.
Oh, that's their job.
And Zuba says the current poll numbers for Whitmer were similar to the survey results in the same period before the 2018 election when Democrats won all 3 of Michigan's top offices. In early September 2018, Whitmer was up 14 points over Republican Bill Schuett, who was then the state's attorney general. Whitmer ended up beating him by 9. And Zuba says this looks exactly like 2018. The motivation to vote is as high. In 2018, the results were tied to a so-called pink wave, I know you don't like the term, of female voters pushing back against the beginning of then-President Donald Trump's administration. Zuba says, and this is the important part of the whole story here about Michigan, Zuba says he's seeing signs of a magenta wave of female voters plus independent voters beginning to form for November because of the abortion debate. And until somebody can stop that conversation or override the conversation, that wave is going to keep building, the pollster said. So step back and look at people like Blake Masters and other Republican candidates for Senate and probably for the House as well, having their wives do the campaign commercials we talked about the other day, scrubbing their websites, trying to get rid of their extreme views on abortion. This is real. It's only building. The idea that, and every time you read a story about this, on the one hand, you read the story saying abortion is like a BFT. And
Yes.
as Zuba says here in this story, and the wave is just building. And then you have the people writing the story and the pundits saying, of course, you realize that the Republicans are still likely to keep the House. And on what basis? Well, historically. Historically, there was no magenta wave. Historically,
That's
there was no
definitely true.
Supreme Court as the person you're running against in the election. Historically, that may be true, but, it's true until it's not. And they can't seem to make the connection between things like what Zuba's reporting and what's actually going on. And on the other hand, their ties to narrative. And it isn't just that, they misinterpreted Biden's speech and misinterpreted the reaction of the public, just as they did to the January 6th thing. Remember, the January 6th committee is going to be a complete waste of time, said David Brooks, representing majority opinion, I think, in the press at that time, which changed because, you know what? It's important.
Okay.
It mattered.
Yeah. How'd they get to magenta for?
I don't know. You got to come up with something. Soccer Moms was already taken.
Right. I mean, I don't know what makes it magenta.
Right,
I guess
whereas it's true that
pollsters
pollsters are there to get the numbers and then look for trends, they're also there to coin new terms that they can claim as their own.
Definitely. Absolutely. That's their major pursuit in life, it seems. Right. I guess magenta, is that maybe pink plus purple? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess.
I guess that's it. All right. Well, for lack of a better, yeah, right. Well, like as I said, the paint is on back order. Supply chain, they're going to have to come up with something different.
Yeah. So after the break, I have this piece from 19th News called "Why Women Are Setting the New Midterms Conversation."
Why not?
2 GOP women pollsters talk about abortion, democracy, and the changing dynamics of this year's elections. But everybody knows the Republicans are going to win the House.
Yes. Okay. Well, sure. Why not?
Everybody knows how.
We'll have them discuss it after this.
Are they from the future?
Heard it on the internets. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Much news to cover. Time to continue. Greg's got more things on the list. Ready to roll.
I'm just looking big picture here. So, yeah, there's individual news stories to talk about, but I just need people to hear and register and have it sink in that, yeah, women being upset about this abortion thing isn't just the in passing.
Yes.
My wife or my girlfriend seems to be more interested in this topic than I am. You can get that from the polling in the Detroit News, where men are like tied over what to do about Tudor Dixon, but women are rejecting her by 27 points or so, whatever the number is.
Okay, so they know. They know what to do about this.
So this is from 19th News, and it involves...
19th, maybe the amendment? Okay. Not the 19th hole. It's not like golf.
I don't know.
Okay.
Why women are setting the new midterms conversation. 2 GOP women pollsters talk about it. We're now just 67 days from Election Day, and the narrative around the midterms has shifted dramatically. A year that began with a focus on inflation concerns and the cost of living. Remember what I told you about the Detroit News poll, where that pales comparative to the abortion issue, has turned into anger and frustration over American rights and freedoms, particularly access to abortion, guns, and the ballot box, and maybe health care, given what happened with this Texas judge, saying that if a religious business owner is offended by having to pay for HIV drugs, then you don't have to.
Yes, another of a ton of outrages that we haven't touched on yet, but true.
And again, I said the other day, I'm just
ridiculous.
Sort of used to having this is ridiculous being decided in a ridiculous way by the courts.
Yeah, well, get used to it. I think Armando certainly sounded the warning for long enough, loud enough.
Right.
For our
if you don't pay attention to the courts now, I don't know what to do with you.
Yeah. So all outcome-based stuff. We just don't like the Affordable Care Act, therefore
courts and sheriffs, who, by the way, to a high proportion, way too high, are part of the Oathbreakers.
Yes,
That's other news that came out. I mean, so there's a lot going on here, and you have to pay attention. So women almost always vote at higher rates than men do, and we've seen indications that more are registering to vote in the wake of the Supreme Court decision that ended a federal right to abortion. But as the Labor Day holiday officially kicks off the sprint to the general election, I wanted to hear from women pollsters about what's driving Republicans, independents, and swing voters, and how gender and the GOP might be intersecting. And my takeaway from what they shared, the 2022 midterms look different than they did 6 months or a year ago. Cost of living still front of mind for many women, but issues of choice have risen in relevance. The moment feels existential for many women, including independents and swing voters, and it's all on their minds when they describe the country as headed in the wrong direction of pollsters. Will the changing dynamics be enough to buck history for the party in power this fall? Either way, it'll be women who once again tell the story. So this is Sarah Longwell, who publishes The Bulwark. I've been able to watch people make shifts as different things come to dominate, Longwell said. Last September and October, asymmetric enthusiasm between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans because they thought the election was stolen, and they've been wrong. They couldn't wait to vote for any living, breathing Republican. But Democrats, on the other hand, were down in the dumps. And then there was this moment where the whole election was going to be a referendum on Joe Biden. Then Uvalde happened, and then coronavirus surged, and things changed, but not that much. Then Dobbs hit, and when Longwell began asking open-ended questions to swing voting women about the priorities after the decision was leaked earlier this year, they would answer inflation, healthcare, the economy. They'd get animated about abortion. Only if you brought it up after the decision came out, they brought it up. And so it then became the thing. Kristen Soltis Anderson, another GOP pollster, recalled being able to predict with reasonable certainty younger voters' approval of the president based on their age during the eras of Trump and Obama. In Anderson's polling, young voters have been among the least likely to approve of Biden's job performance. They were disappointed in tuning out, but you're beginning to see younger voters re-engage. She predicts Republicans still have a slight advantage in November, but she says it's reduced. And she does wonder what happened to the parents, moms in particular, who were fired up last year. And we're among the coalition that propelled Republican Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin to victory on issues like cost of living and critical race theory.
Yeah, that's the reason he won. Oh, man. By the way, I now see Tate Reeves down in Mississippi dealing with his water crisis and other crises, and in a fleece vest when he does it. I don't know if that's a big thing, fleece vests in Mississippi in summer, but...
Well, not just that. I mean, Bob Stefanowski is the Republican gubernatorial candidate in Connecticut running against incumbent Ned Lamont, who will win.
Yeah.
And here's the local paper yesterday. GOP unveils its parental Bill of Rights. Stefanowski, with a very angry picture of him, Stefanowski lays out conservative plan on cultural school issues. With less than 2 months to go until Election Day, Republican gubernatorial candidate Bob Stefanowski is putting parental choice at the forefront of his campaign, proposing ideas intended to energize conservative voters by opposing Connecticut's policy for transgender athletes to giving parents control over what their children are taught in school. So, my take on that is pretending to be a moderate like Youngkin didn't work.
Yeah.
Taxes. Lamont is making Connecticut unaffordable. Didn't work. So now he wants to change the conversation away from abortion, and he wants to go in on transgender kids. And by the way, in Connecticut, that's also not going to work.
Okay, good. I'm glad that they'll be added to the scrap heap, I hope.
Right, but it's pretty amazing.
Yes. And I'm sorry that this keeps happening to you kids.
Well, Youngkin and all. So let me just send you a picture of the actual headline there.
Never get a second term.
you could see Stefanowski's smiling picture.
Oh,
Which
boy.
He's not smiling.
Oh, all right. Let me take a look.
Remember, taking a look at which picture you publish with a story is an editorial decision.
Yes. Yeah, it's an angry photo. I suppose there's probably some calmer ones out there.
Right. Another shift, says the pollster, since the beginning of the year is the number of Americans who see our democracy is in danger. More than 2/3 of Americans say they do in a Quinnipiac poll, and the figure's even higher for women than men. And there's signs Democrats are trying to tap into that sentiment. See the Biden speech, which we just spent a half hour talking about.
Sort
With
of.
Harris on the trail, VP Harris, they don't mention her at all because they don't talk about her, on the trail making the case that the party will protect rights and freedoms, and Biden telling a cheering crowd last month, MAGA Republicans have awakened to the powerful force in America, the women of this nation. MAGA Republicans don't have a clue about the power of women. Let me tell you something. They're about to find out.
Okay.
And
That's all right.
then they conclude by saying rights are on the ballot in November, and the two Republican pollsters I talked to see them as only gaining relevance as the country gets closer to the election. Inflation wasn't an issue, but abortion and voting rights have joined it. They are all women's issues.
All right. Women can have any issues they want.
You want to talk about gas prices? They're going down. You want
Women's
to talk about
issue.
Inflation? That's not only stabilized, but the cost of shipping things from overseas has cratered, going down. So that's going to help inflation as well.
Okay. Let's also say
follow
that's a
Connor
women's
Sen
issue.
on Twitter and see his tweets about that. And the fact of the matter is that the commentators who seem to be married to their previous opinion that this is completely a guarantee that the Republicans are going to take over the House. They may as well measure the drapes. We'll see.
Okay. Well, I am the leader of a new
sent you
movement.
the chart here. Biggest weekly drop yet in ocean freight rates, minus 14%.
Well, that is news. I missed that until you mentioned it. But by the way, I am the leader of a radical element. I do not recognize the validity of that marriage that you mentioned between the experts and their opinion about what happens in midterms. So I'm sorry, they're just not valid in my view, and my religion demands it. Yeah. But, like I said,
until that judge is overruled, you don't have much say about it.
Yeah, I guess not. Also, I have to, if I could just find some way of calling myself Christian in some way, then my religion would matter a little bit more. I might win.
Meanwhile, if you want to go by the numbers, almost equal odds of the Democrats and GOP sweeping now per the deluxe 538 model.
Deluxe?
Yeah, Republicans will win both chambers, 30 and 100.
What? I'm not
Democrats will win both chambers, 26 and 100.
30 in 100. Okay. All right.
30% chance.
Yes. Okay. I got you. 30 and then
Democrats
26.
win both chambers, 26% chance.
It's a statistical landslide, I'm sure.
Right. Now, Republicans win the Senate and Democrats win the House, less than 1%.
Okay,
that's not happening.
Yeah,
that's the one thing I could tell you is not happening. Democrats win the Senate, Republicans win the House, 44%.
Okay.
But the chance of either party sweeping is equal. That's new.
Yeah. Toss up. Interesting. Okay.
So, they're not married to the concept.
Okay. Well, good. Not even a civil union.
Not even.
Remember those.
Okay. Other stories.
Yeah.
Oh, there's this one. Federal grand jury apparently is probing Trump PAC fundraising efforts.
Yes.
As well as their
that was a new one on me.
Formation.
Yeah. Did you?
It's a federal grand jury.
Do you know why?
We're not talking about January 6th committee here.
No, we're not. And I'm not certain what led them there, although I did see
January
Marcy
6th,
Wheeler
the federal
say
grand
that,
jury investigating the activities
it.
leading up to the January 6th attack has expanded its probe to include seeking information about Trump's leadership PAC. These are the same grand jury people, I think, that had Patsy Baloney and his sidekick Regis Philbin go and discuss things about what really happened.
Discuss things? Oh, discuss things. Yes, all right. I heard that one odd in my head. But yeah, I think so. And I think it is a January 6th thing. Marcy was saying, just remember that the January 6th committee started asking questions about the fact that Trump has been using January 6th prosecutions and persecution to raise funds off of his suckers. You know, I'm being targeted. You got to help me.
So
by
is Rick
giving me
Scott,
money.
except Scott diverted it to himself.
Well, what do you mean except? It's the same thing. It's Rick Scott instead of Donald Trump where the money ends up. But they're both
Scott
directing
stole the money, and put it to the
how could you blame him?
National Rick Scott Committee, NRSC.
I don't see any downside to that. No reason not to do it. Their party leader does it.
I mean,
that
he didn't
must
take
mean
it
it's okay
personally.
for him.
He just diverted the funds without telling people what the money was for.
Well, then he's a sucker. He should have diverted it personally.
Well, we don't know that yet, but, you know, it would be irresponsible not to speculate, given that he's Rick Scott.
He's not hiding it on his head, that I can tell you.
Well, it's under his Navy cap.
That could be. Yeah, or under that
Anyway, the interest in the
wig.
fundraising arm came to light as part of a grand jury subpoena seeking documents, records, and testimony from potential witnesses. We talked yesterday on the show with our, what's his name, Brandon Von Grack, discussion about how long things take. And things do take long, but that grand jury is moving along, and no, you don't know about it, and you're not supposed to.
Right.
It's
That's
secret.
True. Well, what they hear is secret. It's not supposed to be a secret that they've got one, but it has been a relatively
But people
quiet
who go
event.
and are summoned to testify
they don't say much.
are allowed to talk to the press.
They
And
don't
so
do
when
it.
you hear about it, it doesn't mean the grand jury's leaking. Just as it doesn't mean the FBI is leaking
right.
if you hear someone close to the investigation said that witnesses were questioned.
That is true. Nor does it mean that the FBI is leaking if you hear that there were nuclear documents at Mar-a-Lago.
Nuclear.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I got it wrong. And, we don't know that that's the case, although the Republicans have, of course, jumped directly to that conclusion. It's not a horrible conclusion. It's not the worst one I've seen them jump to, but, that struck me as interesting because last week, Jim Jordan couldn't get enough FBI DOJ leaks. He was begging for people to become whistleblowers to talk to him and the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee and let them know what was going on inside the investigation. And then one maybe did leak or somebody said something about the investigation, and now Trump's in more trouble, and now he hates this and they all have to be prosecuted. That's Jim Jordan's, flip for the week. He'll be back to loving whistleblowers as soon as he thinks there might be one that would help Trump. So
meanwhile, there's this story in the New York Times. Justice Department faces tough calls in weighing response to the Trump ruling. They have till tomorrow at midnight to decide what to do. And, so far, I can't say typically. It's not like I'm an expert on this and I've watched this for years. But so far, the Justice Department generally weighs in like 15 minutes before the deadline.
Deadline's a deadline, They
No,
have
you're
that
allowed.
option.
It's just they keep writing and rewriting and double checking and triple checking to see if
there's
anything
a
else
lot
came
of,
up. So there's no reason to rush
spell
it.
checking to do.
But the subheader is the department decides whether to appeal the ruling on a special master. It's balancing a desire to speedily resolve the inquiry, which would mean going ahead with what the judge wants, and with the need to limit an expansive view of executive power.
Yeah.
As a layman, a non-lawyer, the way I would put it is, well, what they're weighing is whether or not to put Trump in jail versus it goes in front of the 11th,
circuit,
district, and there are a bunch of conservatives, and God knows how they'd rule.
Yeah, I would have a hard time. Well, I mean,
I don't think
wait for the
that's,
explanation.
if he needs to be in jail, he needs to be in jail.
Yes.
So you send it to him.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, to me, it's easy, but they're the professionals.
I think so too. I think they're probably working on refining the appeal. And then there's also, the DOJ is weird about this stuff, and they very often will say, "Well, I don't know how the case is going to come out, but for reasons, this precedent can't stand unchallenged. We have to settle the question of whether or not there's executive privilege in former presidents." I don't think they're concerned about getting to that, but they not necessarily, and that's a bigger question than anybody will ever settle. But they probably are concerned about the idea of circumscribing presidential power by siphoning it off to former presidents. That doesn't sit well with DOJ. It limits their power.
That's exactly how the article puts it too.
Oh, okay. Well, then I've read it.
Department officials are expected to oppose the judge's call. The question's whether they will mount a narrow approach geared at extracting relatively small concessions from the judge to speed up the review, or if they plan a more comprehensive, riskier appeal to reverse what they see as a dangerous enhancement of presidential power.
Enhancement of presidential power.
Yeah, granting a former president some of the rights and privileges of an actual sitting president.
That's an odd way of putting it. I see that as a diminution of presidential power by limiting it by giving it away to former presidents.
Well, they point out the 11th Circuit has no fewer than 6 Trump appointees, and the subtext there is, oh, look at Cannon. Anybody that Trump appointed, you can't trust.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but that's certainly the subtext. What difference should it make who appointed?
It's not supposed to.
It's not supposed to.
But
the judge in Texas
that
said that,
the PrEP HIV
trying to do preventative care is perfectly legal. And this judge saying, well, not in this case and maybe not in a bunch of other cases. What if I have a religious objection to colonoscopies? Then you don't get those covered either.
Yeah.
But that judge wasn't appointed by Trump. I think that was a G.W. Bush.
I mean, there were
appointees. So it shouldn't matter who appointed them. I mean, I guarantee you it wasn't Obama, but that's not the point.
The
point is that only Trump judges can't be trusted, and you know that because Trump appointed them. That's terrible if that's the reputation the court has now. And by the way, it does.
And it's
because thank you,
Supreme
Court.
Is that it's too narrow because the people who are becoming and this is how you should be looking at the larger picture, I think, and just throw this in here, that the people who have become the terrible Trump judges went to law school and were trained in reading the law in a certain way, and that way was the opinions of crazy judges who have come before them, the leadership of the Federalist Society that came before, that paved the way for these guys. They learned to do what they were doing from the nuttiest nutcases appointed by recent Republicans in past administrations. They just didn't. They've upped their percentage of total lunatics versus occasional, by the book but conservative people that they've appointed to the bench. But they've created this cadre of crazy Trump judges, and the number of Trump judges that are crazy is a larger percentage of them because they've all studied at the feet of the people who led the way, and this judge in Texas is one of them.
Right. I highly respect people with expertise who have been looking at this, who have been there, who have this is Mary McCord in the article, who held several top positions in the Justice Department from 2014 to 2017 in the Obama administration. It's just that a lot of these experts have been so wrong when it comes to trying to predict what the courts would do. Because nobody in their right mind would think somebody would, they did it.
Yeah, I mean, they're not supposed to, and that's the way you're taught, and then you see them just do the opposite. This is something Trump gives a permission structure for doing. Who's going to force me to follow the rules? You expect me to do it, or what are you going to? You're going to lose respect for me? I'm going to win the case. So
Mary McCord says, look, the government is likely to accept the appointment of a special master as a given, but ask the judge to set a firm deadline for the review to be completed. Prosecutors could also ask the material to be quickly sifted, so everything not subject to a challenge would be immediately returned to the investigators, and that the special masters send documents back to the department as soon as they're deemed unobjectionable, and they have to weigh their own interests in moving forward with the investigation and ask the court for a fairly short turnaround time. They can make it manageable in favor of foregoing an appeal, which could take months and maybe more than a year to be decided. So that's the issue.
Things up differently.
So, in her view, well, what you do is you try to work out something with the judge so you can get it done as soon as possible. And then if it turns out that they appeal, then I step back and say, okay, well, you're an expert. You got it wrong.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, that makes it a better, gives me a better understanding of the balancing act that they're.
No, it's a matter of time. Let's say the Department of Justice says, we know we're right. That's not the issue. The issue is, practically speaking, how do we get it done in a timely manner? Because if we appeal and it takes 2.5 years, what's the point?
Yeah. Well, I don't think the appeal can take quite that long, but the whole process certainly could. Maybe. I mean, on the other hand, if you're prosecuting an ex-president, that doesn't really matter if it takes 2.5 years. You know, it's not like you
I'm with
lose
you.
your opportunity
To
to
me,
do it while
look,
he's in
this
office.
is wrong, and
Yeah.
wrong is wrong, and you go ahead and you challenge it.
Yes, and that is
But I'm not a lawyer.
sometimes the case. Yeah, especially when the DOJ is defending presidential prerogatives. But since we're having difficulty deciding whether they're defending it or not, given that Trump's an ex-president, I don't know. Well,
Right.
we'll see
Normally,
how
I
they
would
do this.
defer to the courts and, try to get done what's practical. But this is so incredibly stupid. I can't sit by and let this stand.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's got
That means that no
far-ranging-
former president will ever be prosecuted for anything.
Yes, well, that's bad. Generally, so yeah, you can't let that go. But yeah, there are even more picayune
I'm a
concerns
lawyer,
in
and
the DOJ.
that's not exactly what it. Yeah, come on. Look, this is what's going on here.
Yeah, it's a different kind of law, too. And I mean, line prosecutors will be looking at this in terms of, well, if I lose control of this case by bogging it down in appeals before we even get started, I'm going to lose the shot at conviction. And they're the ones who will be saying, let's work with the special master and just get done already.
And yet, as we pointed out, both this morning and yesterday, line prosecutors have not really been involved with this so far.
Right. That's true, too. So maybe that argues in favor of Main justice, as they say, saying this is one of our red flag issues. This is the kind of thing that we appeal all the time, every time, because you can't afford to not be on the record saying this is wrong. Because even if you lose, you might have grounds
on the
for
one hand, on
winning
the other
again
hand,
later.
I don't want to make light or make oversimplify something that's obviously a relatively complicated situation here. But you better educate the public about what the hell's going on.
All right. Yeah. Who, me now?
No, me.
You.
I'm the public, and I want to know what's going on.
Right.
Here.
Well, that's true. Well, I mean, you're getting decent information. It's just the question of, what they're debating now inside the DOJ is
We'll
just
find
that.
out by 12:49 p.m.
When's
tomorrow.
deadline? Tomorrow? Okay.
Or 11:49 p.m.
Oh, yeah, right after
Tomorrow
the show
midnight's
on
the deadline,
Friday.
so they got to tell the judge what they're up to.
Okay. Well, I think they should. And they will, and we'll see what it's going to be. And I have a article in front of me, somebody arguing, well, they ought to accept the special master thing and move on. Maybe not. I don't think the special master themselves can do too much damage to things, and they might be able to limit the amount of time they do it. But it'll be interesting to see whether they convince the bigwigs at Main Justice to say, yeah, we should just let this whole executive privilege thing go for now. I doubt it. I can't see him doing it, but I don't know. Crazier things have happened.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll see.
Okay.
This is if your
Maybe we
practical
won't see. How about that?
solution is, look, let's just take the special master because that way we get to prosecute sooner. Then you better prosecute.
I guess so. That's true. Right. Yeah. If you're going to that, and that's probably part of the debate too. Well, you're committing us to a prosecution now because you're saying that this is better, practically speaking. Practically being what? What does practical mean? Getting to a prosecution, I assume. If you're doing it for theoretical reasons, you can have all the time in the world.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay.
Anyway,
point.
maybe some smart lawyers can explain it better.
Yeah,
But that's how I'm looking at it. As IANAL, and I don't try to be one.
Right.
But I am telling you that the public really wants to understand what's going on here and why nobody's above the law seems to be, this person is.
Yeah, going by the wayside. Presidents always
Because
kind of
according to that judge, they are.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's most worrisome about it. I mean, everybody kind of has come to accept, all right, well, nobody's above the law, even the President of the United States, except he really is because everybody knows now. You've heard it a million times.
I understand deference.
Yeah.
But deference isn't the same thing as rewriting the rules.
It's not deference when you rewrite the rules. It's the opposite. You're an upstart, you crazy revolutionary. But yeah, everybody has come to understand.
I move we vacate that chair.
If not enjoy the idea that the president is in fact, while he's sitting, you can't prosecute a sitting president thing. Okay, so he's a little bit above the law. But don't worry, soon he won't be president, and then we'll be able to deal with him. Unless, of course, they just decide, oh no, the real rule is once you're elected president, you're just immune from everything always, no matter what. That cocaine, executive privilege. Sure. Okay. Fine. Can that really stand? That will disturb people, I think, to some extent. Even some Republicans, even some Trump supporters probably won't like that a whole lot. After he dies, they won't want anyone else to have that power.
Right. So in the remaining minute or less than a minute or however much we have, two stories worth note. Of course, one you've already mentioned. The BBC is canceling its regular programming for today. And one of their anchors was seen wearing a black tie. And so the Queen's health is an issue, and that's why all of that's happening. And, of course, royal family members are rushing to Balmoral up in Scotland to be with the Queen, and we'll see what happens. The other story of note, this is Max Boot writing a column, an opinion column, but pretty much backed up by the facts. Putin is losing his war of choice in Ukraine. And it turns out that the very difficult battle in Kherson to try to isolate and then destroy Russian troops unless they flee is matched by Ukrainian incursions into the Kharkiv area. And the Russians are having a lot of difficulty dealing with all of this. And so we'll have to keep an eye on what's going on. But the so-called Ukrainian counteroffensive is, in fact, more than so-called.
Okay. And it's extremely offensive as well. So, all right. Well, good luck to them. I don't know what else you can say about this except, or here's weapons. I guess we could say that. That might be more.
And also here's money. So Biden will be sending more billions there, which, they need. And that's good. Right. Okay. So it's a slow motion offensive.
I guess so. And these things
appears
happen
to be
slowly.
working. And no, it's not just about Kherson. And if the idea was to feint and lure Russian soldiers to rush over to Kherson, leaving Kharkiv and other areas undefended, well, good for you. It appears to have worked.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope that was the instruction. All right. Well, we'll be back in just a minute. Greg won't, of course. He'll be back again Monday, and we'll see what has happened to the Queen by then. Who's the last monarch
slow
to die
down
in
a little
Scotland?
bit. We're having trouble keeping up here.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if I can cram it in the whole next hour. Okay. Well, thank you for the lightning round. Thunder comes next. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The Skype boop hang-up sound, possibly audible on our return. That's okay. I mean, I'm only saying that just to explain this. By the way, we can't stop, right? There's so much news, so many things that he wants to share. That 1 minute break, we're still like, well, what about this? What about this story? How about this one? I'm going to send you another one. And that's because we love to tell you the news. So, we just can't stop with that stuff. All right, let me see where to go next. I'm going to have to segue a little bit. Let me read. I had an article in front of me that I mentioned, and now I'm curious to read it and see what it's all about. I had another article open from The Hill. I don't even remember what it was, but I saw in the little sidebar, and this is the whole point of these little sidebars, to lure you into a different story. Justice should welcome special master for Mar-a-Lago case. Written by Martin Scheel, maybe Sheil, an opinion piece here. And I'm going to go down and take a look at who Martin is. And that'll give us some idea, perhaps, of what we're about to hear. Martin J. Scheel is a retired supervisory agent for IRS criminal investigation with 30 years experience. He can't be a huge Trump fan, right? Probably. But anyway, including service as coordinator of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. That's not going to be pro-Trump, I don't think. For the Gulf Coast region, although that might be where he was getting his Sudafed, so I don't know. Branch chief for the North Texas District. He is Southern. Special agent in charge for the South Texas District in San Antonio, and as director of IRS CI Asset Forfeiture in Washington, D.C. Bit of an enigma, I guess. Here, let me see what he has to say and why he thinks they should welcome a special master. Or I understand the position of, okay, maybe we don't, throw ourselves in front of on the train tracks in front of the special master thing, but we'll see. What if Judge Eileen Cannon is right? This is not an auspicious start here. In terms of conducting a criminal investigation, what is the actual harm in appointing the special master in the Mar-a-Lago case? That is a different question from what if she's right. What if she's wrong and what's the harm in her being wrong, I think would be a more promising start. For argument's sake, let's take the point of view that appointing a special master is no big deal and will eventually work to the government's advantage. Why would anyone do that? Because criminal investigations are complicated, and one must take the long view here. The Department of Justice needs to keep its powder dry for the time being, resist any appeal for now. The mother of all legal battles will likely come after an indictment, if any, comes down. Should Donald Trump or any of his associates be charged, the legal defense team would almost certainly file a motion to suppress all evidence obtained by the government derived from the execution of the warrant at Mar-a-Lago. It's not necessarily a workable motion, but they'll probably file it, because why not? The court will then set a date for a suppression hearing, which would effectively be a mini trial, because should the government prevail, and they should, given what is known about the case so far, that's helpful, it would be game, set, match DOJ. Evidence from the search warrant would be admitted into court during the actual trial, and Trump has no viable defense that I see. So, the suppression hearing would be the big deal. The government's hand would actually be reinforced during a suppression hearing by the appointment of a special master. DOJ could argue that not only did the FBI follow every DOJ protocol with regard to the search warrant, but the evidence was also reviewed by a special master as requested by the Trump legal team. It should not take more than a month or so for the special master to analyze the documents seized. So, those arguing that a special master appointment is slowing things down with regard to the investigation really don't know what they're talking about, because an appeal of the special master decision to the 11th Circuit, one of the most conservative in the land, would likely take months. And by the way, I don't think it's necessarily the case that it is one or the other. They could, I think, allow themselves to proceed with a special master and reserve the issue for appeal as well, and appeal it on the side, but proceed with the case anyway. I mean, I think that they can, so long as they make their objections timely known, they can say, well, we do plan to appeal, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an interlocutory appeal settled before we go forward. We think it would be enough for us to say we're willing to accept that a special master could be allowed to do this work, and then we could talk about whether or not, I mean, it wouldn't damage our case irreparably to allow a special master to do the work, and then say, let's talk later about whether that was a mistake or not in terms of the legal ramifications. It won't change. I don't think there's anything a special master can do that will get Trump off the hook here. Except, I guess, rule that the evidence is inadmissible in some way, although it wouldn't be that wouldn't be what the special master rules. And I guess that's where the problem really lies. No matter what the special master has to say, if they're limited to the question of separating out the different kinds of evidence and say these things are subject to attorney-client privilege, these things are just private items that have nothing to do with the president's service and don't fall under the Presidential Records Act. These things have a colorable claim to executive privilege, and the court itself can settle that, but I identify these things as requiring special attention. That won't be determinative of the admissibility of this evidence in court. That'll still be up to the trial judge. Whoever that turns out to be. But, it might be influenced by the special master's decisions. But you can still say, all right, well, we'll allow a special master to make recommendations like that, even though they might, end up being accepted by a trial judge, and we might not agree with them. We can both appeal those decisions, and we can reserve the issue later of saying, you know what, there really shouldn't have been a special master at all in the first place. And although we were willing to go along with it for expediency's sake, we don't think it should ever rest as precedent because it's dumb for a lot of reasons. So I think that they can do that. Anyway, and he's right that it shouldn't take very long for a special master to analyze the documents. There weren't that many of them, and if that's the special master's only job, it really shouldn't take that long. I mean, it's a lot of documents, but it's not that many. They've seen more. Anyway, I don't know. They're not wrong in saying, where he says those arguing the special master appointment is slowing things down with regard to the investigation really don't know what they're talking about. Maybe they're just overstating the case. They do know what they're talking about. Oh, not all of them know what they're talking about. But those who say it's slowing things down, with respect to that, it is slowing things down, just not terribly. So I don't know how much they know about what they're talking about either. Anyway, let's see. So, but if you put everything on hold and say we refuse to proceed with any other part of this case until the special master decision is settled and an appeal, well, that would be unnecessarily slowing things down, because I think you can run on 2, 3, 4 tracks here. So back to the article here. When Judge Cannon asked out loud to the government, what do you have to lose? She was right. There is almost nothing to lose. That's overbroad. Should the special master exclude a couple of miscellaneous documents, the DOJ would still have several hundred at its disposal to prosecute. If the special master were to exclude all the documents seized, using an expansive interpretation of executive privilege, then the DOJ must fight that legal battle to the highest court. Yes, but I guarantee you that there will be questions along the way. You're actually disputing the entirety of the special master's decision. And in fact, I see now you're disputing that the special master should never have been appointed in the first place, but you made no objection at any point. And I don't know that I think this objection should be enough. Like, you waited until the outcome was done, and then you decided because you got a bad outcome, you were philosophically opposed to the whole thing. I needed to see some objection on the record earlier. If you let the special master go forward, but say, mind you, I do not believe that this should ever be happening, I just will be willing to settle it later for the court's sake and for our sake, that at least puts it on the record, and you can say, yeah, my objection was noted at the time, Your Honors. But if you don't and you let it go and say, I thought we were going to win, but it turns out we didn't, and now, therefore, I oppose it, that's going to make some judges angry. Anyway, what are the odds of that? That is, all the records being ruled executive privilege. What are the odds of that happening? Almost none. And yet, you worry about these things. And of course, remember that this has an additional step. Like, the special master could say, well, I think 1/4 of the stuff is subject to executive privilege. Okay, thank you for your recommendation. I, Judge Eileen Cannon, think 100% of them should be subject to executive privilege, actually. I'm overruling you, and we're doing something different. Well, obviously they would appeal that, yes, but don't discount that from your calculations. These people are a little weird. They operate outside the rules. I don't know if this guy is looking at these things broadly enough. He's a rule follower, from what I can tell from the mini bio there. Anyway, back to his thing. The documents seized belong to the government, not the ex-president. That is the whole point of the search warrant. In fact, that's the whole point of the entire investigation. DOJ needs to swallow hard and get on with its investigation, and yes, that means dealing with a special master. The big legal fight, if there is one, will be at the suppression hearing, and the fact that DOJ will have followed every protocol will be better served by abiding by Judge Cannon's wishes and utilizing the special master. The likelihood of a stronger government hand at suppression hearings, should there be one, or any, trumps the lowercase t, trumps the needless delay of wasting time now over premature legal bickering and appeals with regard to the special master. The DOJ needs to recognize that fact and ride out the appointment of a special master, because it holds the winning hand and it can demonstrate the absurdity of Judge Cannon's legal reasoning later if necessary. Appealing now would only move the game to Donald Trump's home court, slow-walking the justice system, one of his specialties. Justice would be best served if DOJ did not fall into that trap. I don't see that Trump has any viable legal defense for his ill-considered actions with regard to mishandling government documents. It appears that Bill Barr, his former attorney general, agrees, for whatever that's worth. DOJ should not help create a defense for him. It should finish the investigation. It can't. Hand down an indictment and do so in short order. And yes, that means dealing with a special master. He's got some points, but he's lost some others. But I see he makes, to me, in my view, loses on some others. I disagree with others, but he does. I think he's making a concession at the end to that bifurcated system of saying we'll accept the special master because we have no choice at the moment because we want to move forward, but we do reserve the issue for appeal later, as opposed to appeal now. We have to have this settled, and we won't let the rest of the proceedings move forward until we know whether Judge Cannon was right or wrong. There are opportunities for overruling that decision later on, and I think, we should be clear about the fact that they exist, and then you'll move more people to believe that it might be okay to let the special master go for now. All right, a million other things that need to get discussed. Moving on then, let's see. Which of the many should we choose at the moment? Okay, something that we missed. I put aside an article, I don't know, a week or two ago. I absolutely meant to bring it up. You've heard the story already, so I didn't keep it from you. But now things are looking worse because Republicans are involved. So naturally things got worse, and more people are catching on with this stuff. And it deserves our attention. But first, I guess now that I've extricated myself from that, the breaking news that happened, I don't know, looks like 5 or 6 or 10 minutes ago when we were in the middle of all of this. Greg has let me know the Queen has died. The Queen of England, that is. We don't have a queen. Queen Elizabeth II has died at age 96. Buckingham Palace has announced, even though she died at Balmoral Castle, not Buckingham, and she has removed from Buckingham to Windsor Palace, I understand. Anyway, this is the few things that I know about the monarchy, but Buckingham Palace still handles all the business end of this stuff, so that's it. It's the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth. She's been the queen since forever. And the British people are not going to know what to do next. And I don't know what that means. I still don't know who's next. I mean, I guess it's Prince Charles, but I lost track of the succession stuff a long time ago, and I thought I had seen, but who knows? I get my British monarchy news from the supermarket checkout line when they have the tabloids displayed. Did Charles ever at some point say, forget it, I don't even want to be king, and just pass it on to William, or what? I guess we'll find out, or I guess they've already said. All right, well, too bad for that, and now all of your Queen Elizabeth II money from whatever time you might have gotten a chance to visit England is now a collector's item, and pretty soon they're going to have somebody else on there. I guess it's going to take a while before they do that, and everyone will feel it's inappropriate for a while. And I don't know. Canadians, do you care? I mean, she's kind of the queen there too, but in a little different way. Sort of, it's the magenta version, I guess, of the U.S. view of the monarchy and the U.K. view of the monarchy mixed together. I assume that they care less, but they care a little bit. I don't know. It's difficult I guess we'll now find out. And it was a good run, and I felt bad for her the whole time. Except she was the queen, and how can you feel bad for somebody that has all the money in the world? So I don't know. Mixed feelings by this American. And now to cope with that, I'm going to leave that behind because I don't know what the hell to say about something like this. Okay, so there you go. That's the news. Oh, Greg is typing some more. Tweet retracted. What? Go Queen Elizabeth. Are you serious? Tweet retracted. I guess the tweet from the BBC. It's from BBC, for God's sake. Was that just practice? Well, all right. Or maybe she's 97 and dead. So maybe they got the number wrong. I got no idea. Well, anyway, good for you, Queen Elizabeth. This should be like Queen Elizabeth III, the reawakening. I don't know what to say about that, but now that's news. I love it. Okay. Or I will say, I did happen to notice that they played on TV somewhere yesterday our favorite version of the story, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Is this possible? Zombie Queen Elizabeth II has come back from... All right, well, I better stop now. There are people who really care, like, about the Queen as a person. And, all I don't know, who aren't even rich or colonizers, I guess, who might just feel like, people deserve more respect. Anyway, I should get out of this. This is not my issue area, and we got it wrong after all. Now, did that tweet get retracted while I was reading it, or did you let that sit, Greg, in my inbox that the Queen was dead? And well, if he reads it, then I'll tell him that the tweet got retracted. I am astonished by this, but okay. A bit of as he says, a Mark Twain reference there. Tweets about my death are premature. So anyway, what was the story that I wanted to get just retracted, huh? So just bad timing. If I had waited a few seconds and gone to the Ron DeSantis story instead, who frankly, if the BBC wanted to announce his death, I guess I would approach it the same way. So, golly, I just don't know what to say. Perhaps Floridians care more about this than I do. I don't know. Anyway, so, golly, that's interesting. So the person who tweeted it, I guess, it wasn't, did the BBC breaking news people tweet it and this person retweeted it? Vivian Salama, who is a Wall Street Journal reporter. Maybe they were fooled by, trolls are out there announcing the Queen's death. In fact, every royal person of every kind has died. Eventually, if you're, on a long enough timeline. Okay, Ron DeSantis, too, will die one day. And, golly, if he had any shame, he might be thinking about crawling into a hole and dying now. The story that I never did get around to reporting, and very nearly didn't get around to discussing now, was that Ron DeSantis, in an effort to be a super MAGA Republican and bolster his claims of false claims of voter fraud around Florida and around the country and be super Trumpy, said that he announced a series of arrests thanks to, remember at some point in the distant past, he said he was going to establish an election integrity police force, basically. And they were going to be running around looking to bust up all this terrible voter fraud that was not actually going on. And they were going to set things right. And I guess they announced their first round of arrests under this new policy. By the way, and anyway, so as it turns out, the people that got arrested, well, for one thing, they're mostly brown. And for another thing, they basically all have very interesting stories. Almost all the people who got arrested saying, with the state saying they weren't supposed to vote and they did vote, were people who thought, for a number of very good reasons, that their voting rights had been restored following a criminal conviction, because, of course, the people of Florida voted to do that. And then the government of Florida, because it's controlled by Republicans, sought to severely curtail or even overturn that decision. And people who basically had served their sentences and then went to the DMV. DMV is where I assume you went to the DMV there. You can get all of that done at DMVs thanks to the motor voter law. But they went to the registration place and said, "Can I register to vote?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." And some of them said, "Even though I'm a convicted criminal, I've served my sentence, but can I register now?" "Yeah, didn't you hear about that referendum?" "Yeah, absolutely. Here, go ahead and do it." And so they registered to vote. And then guess what? They were in one of the narrow areas of exception where you're not supposed to be able to allegedly get your voting rights restored for some reason. And, gee whiz, sorry, we told you the wrong thing, but you're under arrest anyway. And meanwhile, of course, people up in the villages are constantly committing the same offense and casting their dead spouses' ballots and casting 2 ballots of their own and voting in 2 states, and nothing's happening to them because they're old white people who support DeSantis. Whereas the other people are much more likely not to have supported DeSantis, and so we arrest them. And it got noticed right away, and a lot of people made that call right away, and now it's turning out to be true, and the cases against these people are turning out to be travesties of justice and are collapsing, and it's becoming a bigger story all by itself. Meanwhile, back on the Queen's death situation, Vivian Salama tweeting out 1,000 apologies all. I retweeted news about the Queen from what appears to be a fake BBC account. Good reminder to double check even the most authentic looking tweets. So that's interesting too. Someone was doing a fake thing, huh? That's interesting. And I've never really appreciated those sorts of pranks where it's not clear why the joke is funny. I mean, not only because you're dealing with somebody's death, but I mean, the whole country has heard, the whole world has heard, well, we're on kind of a death watch for the Queen, and really at any moment you should expect that there might be such an announcement, and then you make a fake announcement of that, and fooled you, even though, I mean, like, if you do it out of the blue, I don't know how you do it out of the blue with somebody who's 96 years old, but if you do it out of the blue and everybody buys into it, then you can say, prank accomplished. But if you're basically saying, well, it could be true in 15 minutes, but isn't it funny that I made you think that it happened in 13 minutes? Not really. Like, again, listeners to the show remember my gripes about April Fool's Day and having young kids deal with April Fool's Day and say things like, well, what do you want for lunch? I want a ham sandwich. April Fools, I want a peanut butter sandwich. Well, that's not really a great joke, kids, and here's why. And I guess, well, the lesson still needs to be learned by whoever runs BBC Breaking. All right. Well, anyway, not an important part of the news. However, let's see. HuffPost has a good summation maybe that will get us out from under the fact that I haven't read any of these Ron DeSantis articles, and we'll summarize what's going on. Their headline seems promising. A Ron DeSantis crackdown on election fraud looks increasingly shaky. It is a Jonathan Cohn piece. He fits neatly in our Jonathan corner, so we have to include this today. A story in Florida deserves a lot more attention than it's getting. See, I told you. It's about Ron DeSantis, the state's Republican governor, and the arrest of 20 Floridians. The crime they stand accused of committing is a form of election fraud, specifically voting even though past criminal convictions made them ineligible. And like I said, you've likely heard the stories already, but I thought I would bring to your attention the fact that they've all been captured here in this piece. Today's actions send a clear signal to those who are thinking about ballot harvesting or fraudulently voting, DeSantis said at a news conference in August. It wasn't that long ago. Touting the arrest as the first big score of an election integrity task force that he created to great fanfare last year. If you commit an elections crime, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The arrests, the statements, and the sentiments behind them are not especially surprising, given that DeSantis has always presented himself as a tough law and order governor, and they are unlikely to endear him to conservatives. They are likely. I was going to say, what's unlikely about this? To endear him to conservatives who think America is awash in voter fraud, usually committed for the sake of helping Democrats and usually involving voters from minority groups. Sure enough, most of the 20 arrested Floridians are black, according to media accounts, but the rationale for their arrests hasn't held up well to scrutiny. Over the past few weeks, several local and national publications have pieced together the stories of what many of these Floridians actually did and why, and it looks less and less like episodes of nefarious election tampering and more like instances of honest confusion about what a new voter law says. It's the kind of situation that might prompt some introspection and maybe even an apology from some elected officials, but DeSantis hasn't even acknowledged the arrests might have been a mistake, let alone suggested that any of these Floridians deserve an apology, which perhaps says a lot about his style of leadership as well as about the many conservatives who cheer it. I like this article so far. The backdrop to this drama is Florida's history of permanently denying voting rights to convicted felons, which is probably not a great idea at all to begin with. I don't see why you would want to deny people who actually want to participate in society the ability to do it. I mean, it's a dumb premise. I understand punishment for people who commit crimes. That's not a dumb premise, but they've done that punishment, and now they're finished with it. Well, they shouldn't be able to vote because what? Because they'll vote for career criminals to occupy public... The criminals will vote for criminals. I mean, we already have that problem in this country, and we're not getting rid of it anytime soon. We got one of them up here now saying he has executive privilege for the rest of his life. So I'm not too concerned about that. We already have too many criminals involved in politics as it is. So it's a dumb premise, and they only do it, well, they do it because they think there's a political advantage in it, and you can disqualify more Democrats, they believe. And by the way, if you try to, out-logic them, or just let logic take its course and say, well, the truth of the matter is that there are plenty of Republican voters who are criminals as well and who get arrested and would lose their rights to cast their votes, and that's absolutely true. They just say, yes, well, we just plan to actually enforce this thing in a lopsided manner and only against people who we think are more likely to be Democratic voters. That's the problem. People who commit the same crimes in the villages as big Trump supporters don't get prosecuted in this way. That's the issue. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show to everybody, including, I guess, Queen Elizabeth II. Welcome. If I were you, I would wait until after 11, just so that you can hear the rest of the show. I guess still no more news on that front. I don't really want to, keep watching this, but oh my gosh. Anyway, so yeah, Ron DeSantis is a big jerk, and I just wanted the Queen to know that before she passes, because it's extremely important. There is another article on the same subject by the more staid New York Times, and I would like to acknowledge the headlines of both of these pieces just so that you get some idea of all this. Ordinarily, I would read one or both of these pieces in their entirety, but one, I think you already know the story, and I just want to sort of bring the new writing on it to your attention. And two, like I said, or as Greg said, there's so many other stories to get to, and we're running out of time. So the New York Times approach to this by Michael Wines runs under the headline of, "In voter fraud, penalties often depend on who's voting." Yes, and I think that's the aim of what we were reading over in HuffPost as well. Subheader here reads, "Cases in Florida and a survey of prosecutions nationally indicate that despite the furor over voter fraud, prosecutions remain exceedingly rare and penalties vary widely." I'll read a couple paragraphs of this piece just to give you some flavor of this here. And it says, "After 15 years of scrapes with the police, the last thing that 33-year-old Theris, unless it's pronounced in some other way, Terry L. Connie. I'm sorry about mangling the name here, but Theris L. Connie, the last thing he needed was another run-in with the law. He got one anyway 2 years ago after election officials held a presentation on voting rights for inmates of the county jail in Gainesville, Florida. Apparently satisfied that he could vote, Mr. Connie registered after the session and cast a ballot in 2020. In May, he was arrested for breaking a state law banning voting by people serving felony sentences, and he was sentenced to almost another full year in jail. That show no mercy approach is voter fraud, is what Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican, has encouraged this year during his re-election campaign. That was against the law, he said last month about charges against 20 other felons who voted in Florida, and they're going to pay a price for it. So is taking nuclear secret documents, but, whatever. But many of those cases seem to already be falling apart because, like Mr. Connie, the former felons did not intend to vote illegally, and the more typical kind of voter fraud case in Florida has long exacted punishment at a steep discount. Last winter, 4 residents of the Republican-leaning retirement community, the Villages, were arrested for voting twice, once in Florida and again in other states where they had also lived. Despite being charged with third-degree felonies, the same as Mr. Connie, 2 of the Villages residents who pleaded guilty escaped having a criminal record entirely by taking a 24-hour civics class. Trials are pending for the other 2. Now, he got a year in jail, an additional year in jail. They got a 24-hour civics class. Florida is an exaggerated version of America as a whole. A review by the New York Times of some 400 voting fraud charges filed nationwide since 2017 underscores what critics of fraud crackdowns have long said. Actual prosecutions are blue moon events and often netted people who didn't realize they were breaking the law. Punishment can be wildly inconsistent. Most violations draw wrist slaps, while a few high-profile prosecutions produce draconian sentences. Penalties often fall heaviest on those least able to mount a defense. Those who are poor and black are more likely to be sent to jail than comfortable retirees facing similar charges. And by the way, if you're asking questions of the intent and whether they really were, golly, I didn't know I was breaking the law, that's a viable defense when you go and you say, can I register to vote? Yes, you can. And the officials tell you, even though I'm a convicted felon, even though you're a convicted felon, the law has changed. Here's your registration form. You fill it out and you hand it in. And you might think, as many of these people have said to the press, well, don't they then take it to a database and check it against people who aren't allowed to register? And if I can understand if the frontline person at the desk made a mistake, but if the entire voting registration apparatus can't figure this out, then maybe they're right. I really don't have anything to fear, and I do have the right to vote, and I should go ahead and cast a ballot. And besides which, what's the harm in casting a ballot? I'm only casting one, whereas the people in the Villages, you're not allowed to vote twice. Come on. And there should be no question about their intent when you cast a ballot in Florida and a ballot in New York about what's happening here. Everybody knows that you're cheating in that instance, and everybody knows that you know it too. And yet, no punishment for them. Okay, so like I said, I'm only going to skim the surface of these articles. I recommend them to you if you want more about that stuff. But there's so many other things we got to get to, some of which you could guess at, and some of which there's no way. You'll never guess what we're having to get to here. All right, I mentioned earlier, and Greg mentioned, and I think he has the article, I'll certainly include it in the roundup, Michigan GOP or GOP leaders encourage rule breaking at poll worker training session. That according to CNN. How serious is the rule breaking they're encouraging? Well, it is a rule, and you're not supposed to break it, and it could lead to all sorts of weirdness at the polls that could get in the way of people feeling like they are freely and fairly able to cast their ballots. But it might not be the most serious rule in the world, but a rule's a rule, as Ron DeSantis says. But open Michigan, apparently a rule's not a rule. What's the story? Bob Ortega, Audrey Ashe, and Yahya Abu Ghazala, and Drew Griffin. Holy moly. Quite a lot of names attached to the CNN story. Michigan GOP leaders encourage rule breaking at poll worker training session. What's going on? The evening before Michigan's state primary, Wayne County GOP leaders held a Zoom training session for poll workers and partisan observers, warning them about, quote, bad stuff happening during the election and encouraging them to ignore local election rules, barring cell phones and pens from polling places and vote counting centers. Like, okay, they're going to break the rules and they're encouraging that, right? That's very ominous sounding. On the other hand, the rule is you're not allowed to bring your cell phone or pen. Well, is that really a super serious rule? Well, there's a reason for it. And of course, it's a rule. And Ron DeSantis in Florida says rules are rules and people need to be punished. So again, this isn't Florida, but still, a consistent application across the board. No, we're not going to have that because that would lead to Republicans being punished. We can't have that. And yet, again, this is a familiar, the rule wasn't like, oh my God, don't murder people. I mean, if they break that rule, I think they're in trouble, but you never know. But then again, the irony of it, well, bad stuff could happen. I want to warn you of bad stuff happening during the next election. Democrats could be cheating. What are we going to do? How should we deal with this possibility? Well, we should cheat. We should break the rules, but only to catch them, you see. And again, we're in the James Trafficking situation where I was operating a sting operation trying to catch politicians such as myself who were taking bribes, you see. That's what I was really up to. Well, once again, but this is consistent with Republicans, both in the voting fraud area, everything else. And of course, it plays straight into every Republican accusation is a confession. But also, it's something we've been watching for a long time, like the gun debates where they say, you'll want a gun to protect yourself. Don't you see? Don't you understand? Well, I don't know. I think maybe the risks of having one in the house outweigh the possibility that I might need one to protect myself. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll show you how much you need a gun. I'll break into your house and kill your wife, and then you'll wish you had a gun. Well, I mean, one, don't do it. But, we've been over this before. But they seem to think that that's like a valid, first of all, that they should be able to make that threat and not be prosecuted for it is weird. And two, they seem to think that that's like a real argument to make. Well, the question was the risks involved in having a gun in a house from having young children find it and accidentally shoot themselves or others, or people being accidentally shot in my house, or it being stolen from out of my house. All of those things, like, if it plays out as randomness might see happen, then, okay, it might not happen to me, or it might, but that's a risk. But it's not a risk. You can't do a risk assessment when somebody says, well, I'm just going to purposefully inject this harm into the discussion. That's not a risk assessment. That's just a threat that they're making against you. And it's not really, you can't balance it. It's apples and oranges. The risk of this maybe happening at random versus the risk of you actually doing it to me on purpose so that it looks like the chances of harm befalling me if I'm unarmed is in fact greater than the chances of harm befalling me because I'm armed. It doesn't work like that. One's an intentional act and the rest is, the world at large. They're intentional acts by the people who do them, but there's no particular targeting going on. You get what I'm talking about. I don't need to explain it to you. Anyway, back up to Michigan. None of the constraints that they're putting on this are legal. Former State Senator Patrick Colbeck told the trainees on the August 1st call. In other words, go ahead and break the rules because the rules aren't legal. Why aren't they legal? Because I wish that they weren't, and one day I might appeal them or something. But in the meantime, go ahead and break them. That's what he's telling people. As far as cell phones, and then the quote says, I would say maybe just hide it or something, and maybe hide a small pad and a small pen or something like that, because you need to take accurate notes. Cheryl Constantino, the Gop County chairwoman, said, and host of the call, told participants. Some participants raised concerns about being tossed out if they break the rules. Well, that's why you got to do it secretly, Constantino replied. And then there's a big picture of Cheryl Constantino, and, there it is. It was unnecessary, but I guess if you're walking around the streets of Wayne County jurisdictions and you see her, you can give her a piece of your mind now. So, yeah, that's what they're doing up there. While volunteer partisan observers have always been trained by political parties and nonprofit groups in Michigan, the Wayne County GOP had also invited poll workers, like actual poll workers, people hired and paid by the local clerk's office. They are in charge of running the election, and their responsibilities can include checking voter IDs, counting ballots, and even securing voting equipment at the end of the day. Poll workers are required to engage in nonpartisan training overseen by the local clerk, and they are only identified as Republicans for the purposes of making sure that there are equal representation from both major parties working in the election, according to the Michigan Bureau of Elections. During the Wayne County training call obtained by CNN, the presumption that Democrats cheat, thus justifying Republican rule breaking, permeated the discussion. It offers a snapshot of the ways Trump-backing, MAGA-minded conspiracy theorists are intervening in election processes around the country, sometimes encouraging poll workers or volunteer observers to violate election rules in the hopes of finding evidence that Democrats might be doing the same. Again, apples and oranges. You can't violate the rules because you think the other guys are doing it, and you're going to catch them. If you can catch them, you got to catch them legally, right? I mean, it's interesting that that's their idea. Well, you can break the rules in order to catch the other guys breaking the rules. That's okay. And then you serve a perfectly legal warrant to search Mar-a-Lago on Trump, and they say, that's ridiculous. How can you're breaking the rules just to try to catch me breaking the rules? No, I'm actually following the rules. I'm just catching you the normal way, observing your behavior until I can get to the point where I can convince a magistrate judge that I've got enough evidence that what you're doing is criminal, that I have to be able to go in there and search. If I go without the warrant, I mean, you're saying that we ought to have searched Mar-a-Lago without a warrant because you think there's cheating and lawbreaking going on in there, and you're going to just do it yourself. Well, that doesn't really work that way, guys. But you know what? There'll be no consequences for this because ultimately people will say, so they bring a cell phone or a pen. Who cares? Well, the rule's the rule. Yeah, well, not when Republicans do it. Like I said, there's no downside to it for them. All right. Well, we'll jump out of that, too, because there's a lot more to this. Again, I encourage you to read this thing off the air. I'll include it in the roundup for Scott. You should take a look at it, but maybe you've already done so. And that gives us a chance to jump to, 2 or 3 other things that you should know about. One, I'll recommend also in passing. I grabbed this right up from the Washington Post because I saw Marcy Wheeler covering yesterday's events in court, or not from court, but the happenings that were in court while she was in Ireland. So there you go. Where they're probably watching the Queen thing, even though they're not subjects anymore. But okay, they're still watching because they're forced to. And there's nothing else going on. Anyway, this is what she was watching. Judge rejects Oath Keepers founder's bewildering bid to delay trial, trying to do the Trump thing and get a delay in there. Stuart Rhodes is the defendant here, and of course he's going to be on trial for seditious conspiracy. Rachel Weiner and Spencer Sue wrote this up because I couldn't follow, and I took that right up because I couldn't follow Marcy's stuff because there are too many asides, like we do. Right? If you transcribed this show and tried to educate somebody just off the transcription, I'm not sure it would work. Anyway, yesterday, Rhodes was in court and they were trying to manufacture a delay / possible mistrial later on in a bid to keep him out of jail. The federal judge overseeing the seditious conspiracy case against Stuart Rhodes rebuked the Oath Keepers founder in court Wednesday for trying to delay a trial set to start in 3 weeks. Rhodes filed a motion Tuesday afternoon in federal court in the district claiming he could not continue with his current legal team because of a complete or near complete breakdown of communications and needed at least 3 months with a new lawyer to file over a dozen motions. U.S. District Court Judge Amit P. Mehta, M-E-H-T-A, has a lot of these cases, Mehta does, called Rhodes' allegations about the case and his own attorneys incorrect and frankly bewildering. In a nearly 2-hour hearing, he dismissed most of Rhodes' proposed demands as irrelevant, legally impermissible, or redundant. He was basically, had a sovereign citizen-minded person on his hands and had to sift through garbage for 2 hours and yell at him. Mr. Rhodes, at no point since he's been arrested, has remained silent, Mehta said. Never, not once, have I heard a peep in all this time from Mr. Rhodes about his lack of contact with his lawyers or his disenchantment with his lawyer's performance. He said Rhodes could add an attorney to his legal team if he wanted, but that he would be going to trial in 3 weeks, and that his original counsel, James Lee Bright and Philip Linder, would not be removed from the case. Rhodes is accused, of course, of conspiring to use force against the federal government and stop the lawful transfer of power by attacking the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. While he's not accused of entering the building, prosecutors say he oversaw a group that violently confronted law enforcement and tried to hide evidence of those crimes. 3 associates have pleaded guilty to seditious conspiracy. 4 will go to trial with him, and 4 more in November. Delaying would cause havoc to a packed court schedule, Mehta said, and there's no humanly possible way a new attorney could be ready in 90 days. The trial is set to begin September 27th. It was previously scheduled for September 26th, but last week Mehta ordered a 1-day delay for Rosh Hashanah holiday. You'll have to keep that in mind, too, as it'll delay me as well. Mehta called it complete and utter nonsense to suggest that Rhodes was not competently represented by Bright and Linder, whom he credited with leading efforts to help all the defendants prepare for trial. The 2 Texas attorneys have represented Rhodes since his January arrest. Far from being shut out of the process, Mehta said, Rhodes was getting dispensation that no other defendant, to my knowledge, that no other defendant in any case, not just January 6th cases, but in any case in this district is getting. In other words, they've gone out of their way to make it possible for him to have the fairest possible trial, and yet he complains that, oh, well, I haven't been able to consult with my attorneys. Nope, that ain't true. Rhodes is jailed in D.C. U.S. Marshals have brought him to court twice a week to review evidence for 6 hours at a time. No other defendant gets that kind of accommodation, Mehta said. The judge acknowledged that having attorneys in Texas was a challenge, but you chose them, but said Rhodes made that choice not to hire local counsel. Rhodes' new attorney, Edward L. Tarpley Jr., wrote that Rhodes' previous lawyers did not materially communicate with Rhodes regarding trial preparation, witness discovery, evidence selection, or even basic defense strategy, even though Rhodes is a Yale Law School graduate with legal training, experience, and education. Well, then you certainly would have known a long time ago the benefits of hiring local counsel, and you never did it. And yeah, this idea, by the way, oh, I'm suffering in jail. Well, 6 hours a day, twice a week, you're actually hanging out in the air-conditioned confines of the courtroom reviewing evidence for your case. Nobody else gets to do that. And the idea that you haven't had communication and you didn't, you know what there hasn't been no communication with? You telling the courts, this is not going well. I warn you ahead of time, I might need to bring in extra counsel. You wait until 3 weeks before trial, not going to work. Okay. So now you know about that, but I'll bet you didn't know about some of the other things I'm going to bring you. All right. Here's how I'm going to end. Ready for this one? All right. 1. Chuck Schumer in a tough spot over Manchin promise. This is really in preparation for next Tuesday, but you should think about this one. What's going on? This is from The Hill. Alexander Bolton, Aris Foley, and Rachel Frazen, I hope I pronounced your names right, on the byline for this. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, they say Charles, on Wednesday pledged to add permitting reform legislation to a stopgap funding bill that would prevent a government shutdown. But he's in a tough spot as he seeks to deliver on a promise to Joe Manchin, of all people. Should we be delivering on promises to him? Well, they did all of a sudden have a tremendous victory together not that long ago, so maybe he feels compelled. I mean, he probably feels compelled to honor any agreement he has with anybody. But buried in the middle of that is, yes, the stopgap funding bill. So, yeah, we're going to be looking at a continuing resolution again at some point in, I don't know, September, October. We'll talk with Joan about that one, too. But still the thinking is no stomach for a government shutdown currently pending the elections. However, as we said at the start of the show, Republicans have a whole platform of retribution in mind, and it sounds like the Freedom Caucus nuts will be driving a lot of that, and they promise that part of the Republican agenda, should they be handed control of Congress, will be holding the government, that is to say Biden's administration, hostage for various things and shutting down the government. They just don't want to shut it down now, because if they shut it down now, you'll know ahead of the elections, oh my God, the Republicans are going to shut the government down. And they don't want that. They don't want you to realize that they're going to do that. But I'll tell you instead. Anyway, what about Schumer and Manchin? The permitting reform is a side deal that Schumer struck with Manchin in late July to pass that climate, tax, and health care bill known as the Inflation Reduction Act, which was then hailed as a big victory, which is projected to help reduce the nation's carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. So that's something. Manchin offered his support for the bill in July after winning significant concessions, and his vote allowed Democrats to pass a major achievement for President Biden. Schumer made clear Wednesday that he doesn't plan to backtrack on his promise. Permitting reform is part of the IRA, and we will get it done, Schumer said Wednesday. Our intention is to add it to the CR. Well, then it's not part of the IRA, is it? But that plan is running into opposition. This is interesting. From progressive House Democrats and outside environmental groups. There's also a chance that several Senate Democrats may balk at the deal with Manchin now that they no longer need his vote to pass a budget reconciliation bill. I don't know if that's great practice, but it's fun threat. Like, that's what happened when we coupled Build Back Better to the reconciliation bill the first time around, and you said that it would be okay, and we'd get what we want, and you'd get what you want, and that was the deal, and then you reneged. And maybe they'll be interested in reneging on this deal for you, too, now that they've got the votes. And they don't need you anymore. Representative Raul Grijalva's office told The Hill on Wednesday that 50 lawmakers had signed on to his letter calling for a separate vote on the permitting reform provisions instead of putting them in the continuing resolution. Attaching it to a short-term government funding measure would force House progressives to choose between voting no and possibly forcing a shutdown, or voting yes and making it easier to develop new energy projects that would burn fossil fuels and pump more carbon into the atmosphere. Many environmental groups are also up in arms over the deal. More than 650 such organizations sent a letter to Schumer and House Speaker Pelosi expressing their opposition last month. So that's the general setup of things. There's more detail, but perhaps we'll discuss that in the future. We can double back on these things. We could do Friday just like we did today and read the second half of all these articles. One more thing I wanted to throw in there, just because who knows when I'm going to get to this one. And I don't know. This one just strikes me as something to keep an eye on. I think it's interesting and different. And here it is from the Washington Post. Are you ready for this switch in directions? First of all, it has to do with Albania. Bet you didn't see that coming. Albania is the first known country to sever diplomatic ties over a cyber attack. Albania, like, leading the way into the future here, or maybe overreacting to things. But increasingly, cyber attacks between, government actors and their targets, other government targets, has become part of the arsenal, and nobody is really sure how to respond to them. And I don't know. I mean, severing diplomatic ties isn't like that much stronger a response than what we have done in the past, diplomatic sanctions of some sorts, but it's an escalation, and who would have thought it comes from Albania? Who's the actor? Now, I could see where you might say, okay, well, Albania reacting, say, to a Russian cyber attack and saying, we can't countenance this. Russia is just an actor for too much instability in Europe, and, we've been isolationist, for years, and now are sort of emerging as a country, and we can't just let the Russians do this to us. But it wasn't the Russians. So kind of weird, right? What's going on here in the minute or two we have left? NATO member Albania, I bet you didn't remember that one, but yeah, NATO member Albania cut off diplomatic relations with Russia, right? No, Iran on Wednesday over a cyber attack that destroyed government data and shut down services. What is Iran doing attacking Albania? I don't know, man. It's the first known time a nation has taken such an aggressive step in response to a cyber attack, and it generated support from several other nations, including the United States. So this might be a part of our future, too. The United States will take further action to hold Iran accountable for actions that threaten the security of a U.S. ally and set a troubling precedent for cyberspace, said National Security Council spokesperson Adrian Watson. UK and Victor Zora, deputy head of Ukraine's main cybersecurity agency, also tweeted that they stood with Albania, and the UK guy is probably busy, right now. But it's hard to imagine other countries, and so's the Ukrainian, by the way. Geez, holy mackerel. Hard to imagine other countries doing anything similar in response to future cyber attacks. But really, is it? Should it be? Why not? How often do countries cut off diplomatic relations at all for any reason? John Bateman, a senior fellow at the Technology and International Affairs program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former Pentagon cybersecurity official, told me, or any of the people writing this anyhow, the United States didn't end formal diplomatic relations with Russia even after its 2016 election interference. And other countries didn't end relations with the United States after whistleblower Edward Snowden revealed U.S. surveillance operations targeting them. That's true. I am way behind on the music here. Apologies to Justice Putnam for delaying things. But an interesting question. I wonder what motivated it. I don't know. Maybe it's simply, well, Iran would have an interest in undermining NATO, I'm sure, at some level. And maybe they figured Albania just presented a weak link entry point into undermining NATO operations. Here's what happened with the attack. The cyber attack that stirred Albania's ire transpired in July. A group calling itself Homeland Justice claimed credit for the ransomware in a video it posted on a website and a Telegram channel, accompanied by alleged Albanian residence permits for purported members of the Iranian dissident group Mujahideen-e-Khalq, my best guess, known, of course, better to the rest of us as MEK. Those guys I recognize. A few days later, MEK members canceled a summit in Albania, citing terrorist threats and the advice of the Albanian government. So I'm not certain I can speak to with any more clarity about what motivated the attack, but I guess they thought that Albania might be giving shelter to MEK folks, and so therefore the cyber attack. Sure, I guess that explains it. Anyway, just a weird development in a worldwide problem, but a weird corner of the world for us, just showing you that it happens everywhere.
NetworksRadio.com.
And maybe the Albanians have the right idea here.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
All right, now well past time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I don't imagine he's going to be spending a great deal of time on the Albanian question here, but as usual, he has a collection of all the stories that we either didn't give enough time to or didn't even get to. Can you believe there's even more? Well, stay tuned to find out.